Hi everyone, and welcome back to another video with Lawn Fawn. This is Mindy Eggen. In today's video, we are going to be creating a tropical Magic Iris interactive card. I'm going to start off by die cutting out the Magic Iris tropical leaves and the slimline tropical leaves border die, and I'm die cutting this out of Distress Heavy Stock cardstock because I'm going to be adding a lot of ink to this and it's going to be really wet, and the heavy stock really holds up to that amount of liquid that I'm going to be putting on. So there are many ways that we could color up our die cut images here. I'm going to be using the Distress spray stains in Twisted Citron and Pine Needles. So I'm just taking that spray stain, and as I'm kind of swooshing across that die cut, I'm spritzing this with the two different colors. This just adds a little bit of texture to it, and I think really gives it kind of that jungle tropical feel. So this is the Magic Iris Tropical Leaves add-on that I did first, and I have quite a bit of extra ink on my glass surface here. So I'm going to take that border, spritz it with a little bit of water, and then just kind of drag this through some of that ink just to try and use up what's there. This is going to create kind of a base layer of my inking. So it's not going to be complete. I'm going to add to it, but I just thought it was a great way to use up some of that ink. So I'm going to give that a few minutes to dry, and then I'm going to come back in again with Twisted Citron and Lucky Clover, which is actually the color I meant to grab to begin with. The Pine Needles was pretty dark, so I really like the Twisted Citron and Lucky Clover. Once that is dry, I'm going to bring in some mica spray, and this is in brushed pewter. Now it's very, very subtle. This is more dramatic on the actual tropical leaves dies, but I think it still adds a little bit of shimmer to my die cut images. So I'll put these off on the side to fully dry, and I'm going to color in my images. So these images are stamped on the Lawn Fawn 80-pound white cardstock in their jet black ink, which is Copic friendly. And these images are from the Toucan Do It stamp set, which is super cute, and I love, love, love these images. Now I do have the colors listed at the top of the screen there for you. For my Jaguar, I have E57, 55, 53, and 51. Now I didn't come in with the 57 until the kind of second round of coloring because I wanted that shadow area to be just a little bit more dramatic. So I'm keeping the shadow area on the left-hand side of the Jaguar and blending out with the rest of the colors. To me, the left-hand side is where the shadow area is going to be because it's facing to the right. So that's kind of how I decide where my lightest or my darkest areas are going to go. Once I have that all colored in, I'm going to come in for the spots, and for that I'll be using E27 and E23, adding just little dabs of color to each of those. And for the nose, I'm going to come in with an N6, I believe. So my other Jaguar here, I sped up quite a bit because I'm using the same exact colors as I did in the previous one, but I still wanted to include the coloring here for you. And I'll be honest, when an animal is kind of facing in this direction where it's got the side shot, I really do struggle with where my light and dark areas are. So just kind of winging it. I have a dark area on the top and also on the underside of the belly. And then I just blend out, so my highlight area is going to be kind of in the middle of the body. And once that's all blended, I'll come in with those same colors, the E27 and 23, and add in those two colors for the spots. Now for the toucan, I will be using N8, N6, and N4, and I did try and kind of flick off on the wings to add just a little dimension to it, really make it look like feathers, and then blending out. So my N4 is going to be my highlight area, and I think that adding those little flicks in the wings really did help kind of give me that feathery look. Now for the beak, this can be done in a variety of colors and really get creative. I just stuck to some oranges, which is the YR09, 07, and 04, and I added little flicks of the B000 around the eye. Then I can take the coordinating dies, line them up, and die cut them out. Now for the background of my card, I'm once again using the Lawn Fawn 80-pound white cardstock, and I'm going to be doing some ink blending with my Distress Oxides and just a foam blending tool. I like to use the foam blending tools when I need to apply a lot of color. So I started with scattered straw on one end, brought it up quite a bit because remember I die cut out that border before, so that border is going to cover a lot of the bottom part of my card. Then I'm coming in with dried marigold, And then I will bring in worn lipstick. And you're going to notice I have some significant lines between these colors. And that's okay because I'm going to really work this color and blend it out. A lot of times with distress oxides, you just keep working that color, keep going over it, and it will smooth out the transition between the colors. Now my next color is going to be Seedless Preserves, and I'll add that to the very top of my card, blending from my glass mat onto my cardstock. And you can see I have these very significant lines. Now I didn't feel like the Seedless Preserves was quite dark enough for me. I wanted that to be a little bit more dramatic. So I'm going to come in with black soot and just really lightly blending that at the very top. Also keep in mind that I'm going to be die cutting this piece. So I did speed this up, but I'm just taking my blending tools and going back over those lines. Sometimes using the ink that's already on it. Other times I'm picking up just a little bit more ink to smooth out the transitions. Once I'm happy with the blend, I'm going to take the Magic Iris add-on. I'm going to hold it in place over my cardstock and die cut it out. And whenever I do the die cutting from this add-on, which is like a full panel for the Magic Iris, I like to save all of the pieces from it, like the centerpiece or even the border of it, because those can always be used later on in a project, whether for our tab or the inside of our Magic Iris. So off screen, I die cut out my 3 hot dog shapes that are going to go in our Magic Iris, and I wanted this to match my Tropical Leaves Magic Iris add-on. So I just laid these out and I'm spritzing them with the Twisted Citron and the Lucky Clover. Now this is just cut from 80-pound regular cardstock, but I'm being really careful and just not adding a ton of ink to them. So I'm setting those off on the side to dry, and I have my 3 circles here die cut from the 80-pound white cardstock. I'm going to take that flux capacitor shape and die cut this out from one of those circles. So I'll line that up in the center of it, hold it in place with that low tack tape, and that's die cutting out those slits for us to add these hot dog shapes. Now I can just take those pieces, slide them into those die cut slots, and make sure that they're formed around the center of my circle. Now there are little X's that are kind of embossed into our little hot dog shapes, and I'm adding some small glue dots right on top of those X's. Once the glue dots are in place, I'm going to just kind of fiddle with this and make sure that they are all completely formed around my circle. And then I'm going to take one of those other circle die cut pieces and just lay it directly on top. So just making sure that my insides all match up. My curve of the hot dog matches the curve of the center of my white circle. Once that's in place, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to take my tape runner and just add a strip of adhesive to these lines that the die also cut or just embossed on the back of this. So just add a strip of adhesive. So there's going to be 3 strips, and then I have 3 brackets that I die cut out of white cardstock as well. And I'm going to lay that directly over those strips of adhesive that I put down, lining the curve of those brackets up with that inner curve of the circle. Then I can flip this back over, and I'm taking my tab that I die cut out of white cardstock, adding a little bit of adhesive to one end. I'm going to match the curve of that tab up with the inner circle of my die cut piece, kind of forming a V down by my bracket. You can see down by my finger there, I have kind of a V between the tab and the bracket, and then I can push that down to secure it in place. Now I can bring in that 3rd die cut circle, and I'm going to add adhesive to all of those brackets. Now I'm going to carefully fold this in. You don't want to go all the way in, and I don't think it really can. You just want to gently fold those over. If you put it too tight, your Magic Iris won't work, trust me. My first one I did was too tight, and I struggled really hard trying to get this to work. But this is perfect, and it's working. So now we can work on the rest of our card. Now remember all those pieces that I said I like to save? This is one of them. This is the centerpiece, and I'm die cutting out that tab add-on. I'm going to set that off on the side and work on a few other elements for the front of my card, starting with that slimline tropical leaves border that I created. I wanted the stitching to match my card front, so I'm taking that tropical or that Magic Iris add-on, and I'm putting my border towards the bottom there. I'm going to hold it in place with low tack tape, and then that way when I add this to the front of the card, all of the stitching will match up. Now before I do that, I wanted to add just a little bit more interest to each of these die cut pieces. So I took some of that Lucky Clover or that Pine Needles Distress Spray Stain, and I added just a little bit to my work surface with a spritz of water, and I'm picking that up and just flicking that all over the background. Now it doesn't have to be done. This I just thought was just adding a little bit more to the front of the card. And I'll do the same thing with the Tropical Leaves add-on piece for my magic iris. Now, one other element that I wanted to add to my card are some flowers. I just thought this would be a really nice pop of color and kind of finish off the tropical feel. So I die cut these flowers from sunflower and guava cardstock, and I'm layering these together. So I have pink flowers with yellow centers. So now I have most of the components ready to put my card together. I started with adding that Tropical Leaves border die to the bottom of the card, and I just added it with a tape runner. Then I'm taking the Magical Iris Tropical Leaves and I'm adding liquid glue to the back of all of those leaves, just adding little dots of glue, and I'm going to place this over the center of my Magic Iris front panel. So once I place that down, I just kind of hold it in place for a few minutes with my fingers, or you can place an acrylic block on top of it just to make sure that that liquid glue is really secure. Then I can start adding in all of my images. So I have my two jaguars here that I'm going to add to the bottom of the card, and I'm just using some liquid glue. You could also use some foam squares or the tape runner, adding those to the very bottom. I have my flowers here that I'm going to place. Now my toucan, I kind of use that as a placeholder. That's where I want him to go, but I'm not going to add him just yet because I wanted him to hang over that center a little bit, but I didn't want him to be in the way. So he's going to be the last thing that I attach. So I'm just taking those flowers, adding little groupings to the top kind of kitty corner from each other. And then now I can work on adding my actual interactive piece. So I have this tab add-on that I die cut from that blended cardstock panel. I'm adding some tape runner to it and lining that up with my tab on the Magic Iris. Now you don't want to go too far in. You want to butt it up right next to your circle. If you get too far in, your tab's not going to match up really well with the edge of the card. Now, I did also notice one time when I was working with a Magic Iris, my tab wasn't very stable. So I die cut another piece from white cardstock. I'm adding tape runner to the top of that piece, and I'm going to place it on the back of the tab, and this really did help stabilize this a lot. Then I'll just flip this back over, and I have a little bit of excess hanging off, so I'm going to bring my scissors in and just trim that right off. Now I'm ready to add my interactive piece to my front card panel. So I'm going to take my tape runner and add adhesive all over the top of the card. The top of the card is okay to add the adhesive to because there's no interactive portion on this. You just want to make sure you don't get any in the center of your card. So once I have the tape on there, I'm going to line this up. Now I line up the center piece and also my tab on the right hand side. You want to make sure your tab is flush and your center piece is lined up, and then I can push that down to secure it in place. I still need a message for the inside of my Magic Iris, so I am taking one of the circle pieces that came out of my die cut circles. So like I said, I like to save all of these pieces. You never know when they're going to come in handy. And I am stamping a message from the Magic Messages stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that in jet black ink, and I'll stamp it twice to make sure that it's really nice and a crisp black. Now for a card base, I'm going to use a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm lining up my front panel to make sure I have an even border around the edge, and then I'm taking my sentiment, placing it in the center, and I'm going to just kind of hold that there with my thumb, and I twist and turn off that front panel. So that helps me line up my sentiment really straight for my Magic Iris. Now to attach my front card panel to my card base, I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to add some foam squares. You want to make sure that these squares are not in the way of your interactive piece. So I'll remove the backing on all of those foam squares, and I'm going to take my tape runner and I'm going to add it just over those brackets. We have 3 brackets there, and I'm going to add the tape runner just on that. If you put the tape runner anywhere else, your interactive portion is not going to move. Then I can bring in my card base. Make sure your Magic Iris is open so you can see your message, and then you can line that up straight. So I have a really nice white margin going around the front of my card. So one last thing that I need to do is just add a sentiment to the front of the card, and I am using the big scripty words for that, stamping big hugs onto white cardstock with the jet black ink. I'll line up the coordinating die and die cut that out, and then I'm lining this up on the front of the card. Now those kind of the beginning and the end of it were a little too swoopy and extended too far, so I just trimmed those off. So that shortens it up a little bit, makes it a perfect fit for the front of my card without getting in the way of my tab. And then I can take the liquid glue, add little dots to the back of my scripty word, and then I can add this to the front of the card. So now that everything is in place, I can finally bring in my little toucan. I added liquid glue just to one half of him so that I don't have glue on the beak and it doesn't obstruct my magic iris element. And that would finish off my card. So now I can pull the tab, reveal this adorable little message that says, "You make me smile." Great tropical vibes coming off of this. I hope this card has inspired you using the Magic Iris Tropical Leaves add-on, and also maybe another way to color up your die cuts. So now you can use Distress spray stains if you have any on hand. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon.